You walk into the office at 9 o'clock. You check your email, your calendar, and your Slack messages before you've even sat down. Already you feel it. The pull, the weight, the invisible tax that starts the moment you cross the threshold. That tax is the cost of your attention. The fluorescent lights hum at a frequency designed to keep you awake, not focused. The air smells of toner and the ghost of someone's microwaved lunch. A colleague taps your shoulder at 9:07 to ask about a spreadsheet you haven't opened yet. That tap is not a request. It is a transfer of cognitive debt. In 1911, Frederick Winslow Taylor published The Principles of Scientific Management. His time and motion studies were the first attempt to quantify work interruptions as a loss of productive seconds. He stood behind workers with a stopwatch, calculating the precise cost of every unnecessary movement. The stopwatch was a cage. Taylor's logic was simple. If you can measure attention, you can control attention. 4 years later, Frank and Lillian Gilbreth released their motion study of a bricklaying crew. They documented that unnecessary movements cost an average of 12% of total labor time. The Gilbreths were trying to liberate workers from fatigue, but their science was soon weaponized. The irony is that modern office design was born from a misunderstanding of that same science. In 1964, Herman Miller introduced the Action Office, the first commercial open plan system. It was marketed as a way to increase communication and reduce idle time. The company sold the removal of walls as a liberation. But the true liberation was for the real estate spreadsheet. Wall removal meant more desks per square foot. The collaboration narrative was the packaging, not the product. If what you're hearing starts to shift something, stay with me. This is where that continues. You just saw the truth behind the packaging. The collaboration story was a cover for a density play. If that landed, subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this unraveling. There is more hidden beneath the surface of your everyday experience. And in the comments, tell me the first moment in your own office when you suspected the design was not for your benefit. Just the reaction. No explanation needed. In 1970, Robert Probst patented Action Office 2, the prototype of today's cubicle farm. Probst was a designer who genuinely believed in human-centered work. His patent explicitly states that visual barriers reduce distraction and increase focus. He wanted to give every worker a semi-private sanctuary. But the market did not buy the sanctuary, it bought the module. Probst's vision was flattened into a grid of fabric-covered partitions. The partitions were too low to block sound and too high to allow escape. What remained was the worst of both worlds. You could see everyone, but you could not hear anyone clearly. The noise became a constant, shapeless pressure. By 1996, Harvard Business Review reported that 68% of new tech headquarters adopted the open plan layout, citing the need to foster rapid information flow. That figure is not a coincidence. It is a signal. The industry chose the aesthetic of communication over the reality of it. Here is what the evidence actually shows. In 2002, the UK's Office of the Deputy Prime Minister released a review of open plan offices. The conclusion was blunt. Uncontrolled noise and visual distraction can reduce task performance by up to 30%. Not 3%, 30%. Read that again. That means a building designed to make work faster was actually making work slower by nearly a third. The collaboration narrative was contradicted by its own data, but the data was published in a government review, not a viral press release. Nobody read it. Some people hear this and ignore it. You are not that person. You are part of the few who stop and take in the number, 30%. That kind of recognition deserves company. Subscribe to stay connected with others who refuse to pretend the noise is normal. And in the comments, drop the word 30 if this number confirmed something you already felt but could not prove. The real cost is not measured in time alone. It is measured in the quality of what your brain produces. Your working memory is a finite space. Every interruption is a forced context switch. The human brain cannot multitask the way your operating system does. When you switch from writing a report to answering a chat message, your brain does not parallel process. It stops one task, loads the new context, and then attempts to reload the original context. Each reload is incomplete. A 2008 study by Mark, Gudith, and Klock at the University of California tracked the cost of these interruptions. Participants were interrupted every 5 minutes. The results are almost comical if they were not so tragic. The interrupted subjects completed tasks 23% faster, but they made 15% more errors. They compensated for fragmentation by sacrificing accuracy. They became faster, but worse. The study's real finding is the hidden ratio. Every minute of interruption costs over 20 minutes of recovery, not to resume peak depth. Just to remember what you were doing and why. Write this in the comments. What part of this did you already know, but never said out loud? At what point did it start feeling personal? Now consider what happens to your nervous system when this pattern repeats all day. The brain does not distinguish between an urgent alert and a tiger in the grass. A notification triggers a tiny spike of cortisol, the stress hormone. You check it, and the relief releases a smaller spike of dopamine. You are caught in a biochemical loop. The loop rewards vigilance over depth. Your brain learns that the safest state is constant scanning. In 2015, researcher R.B. Miller coined a term for this cumulative load in MIT Sloan Management Review. He called it the attention tax. The phrase is precise. Like a tax, the cost is obligatory and invisible. You never see the deduction. You only feel the scarcity it leaves behind. Banbury and Berry published a study in 1999 on office noise and performance. They exposed participants to moderate background speech at roughly 55 decibels, the level of a normal conversation 6 feet away. Reading comprehension scores dropped 12% compared to quiet conditions at 35 decibels. That is not loud noise. That is the sound of a colleague talking to someone across the aisle. The sound you cannot escape. The open plan does not just tax your focus. It taxes your physiological baseline. Hoppekangas and colleagues conducted a multi-site field study in 2018 with over 1,200 participants. Open plan workers reported 27% lower satisfaction scores and a 19% increase in perceived workload. The same space that was supposed to make collaboration effortless was making people feel like they were doing more work with less support. And yet, the layouts kept spreading. By 2023, the World Economic Forum listed attention fatigue among the top 10 workplace risks for the next decade, citing a projected global productivity loss of $2.5 trillion annually. The tax is no longer a hidden cost. It is a macroeconomic number. The world noticed. The office did not. This is just the surface. What comes next changes everything. Consider the 1997 study that tracked the physical toll. The constant state of partial attention elevates resting heart rate and increases the production of stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine. Over months and years, this chronic low-grade activation contributes to burnout, cardiovascular strain, and immune suppression. The attention tax is not just a productivity cost. It is a health cost. The architects of the modern office environment did not need to explicitly design a system of exhaustion. They only needed to prioritize density and call it collaboration. The human body did the rest. In 2021, Pew Research Center surveyed American workers after the pandemic forced a mass shift to remote work. 54% reported increased difficulty concentrating while working from home. The numbers are counterintuitive. The home office lacks the physical interruptions of the cubicle, but adds digital interruptions that are even harder to escape. The attention tax followed the worker home. By 2018, the European Union had already passed a workplace wellness directive requiring employers to assess cognitive load and distraction-related fatigue in their risk assessment reports. The directive recognized that attention is a physical resource, not an abstract discipline. It mandated measurement. But measurement without redesign is just documentation. The offices kept the same layouts and added stress management workshops. The term attention tax was coined exactly to name the invisible transfer. Every time you are pulled from deep work to surface work, you pay. The company collects the flexibility of your attention. Your output degrades. Your health erodes. Your sense of agency shrinks. You end the day exhausted and wonder what you actually accomplished. If you have ever sat at your desk at 2 p.m. with a spreadsheet open but processed nothing for 45 minutes because the person behind you will not stop talking about their weekend, you already know this is not a discipline problem. It is an architectural problem. It is a system design problem. And systems that design for extraction cannot be fixed by personal effort alone. The good news is that the system is not inevitable. The bad news is that you are the only one who can enforce your boundaries. No manager will protect your attention. No floor plan will be redesigned for your nervous system. The EU directive asks employers to assess the risk. It does not require them to remove it. The antidote starts with a single insight. Your attention is not a soft skill. It is a biological resource with a hard limit. Once you treat it that way, everything changes. This is the moment where the insight becomes your toolkit. Attention as biology, not discipline. Subscribe so you are there when we turn this into a concrete boundary you can actually draw. The next part will show you how to claim the refund. And in the comments, write "reclaim" if you are ready to stop paying the tax without knowing what you are buying. The real question is not whether the office needs to change. The real question is whether you are willing to keep paying that tax without knowing what you are buying. The price is already being deducted. You are the one who has to claim the refund. Imagine for a moment a worker in 1965 sitting in an Action office prototype. They were told the new layout would unlock creativity. But the real gift was surveillance. Managers could now see every head bent over a keyboard, every blank stare at a monitor. The visibility was not for connection. It was for control dressed in the language of teamwork. The same logic appeared in the 1990s, when tech companies adopted the open plan wholesale. They sold it as a philosophy of transparency. But the result was a uniform workspace where privacy became a privilege reserved for corner offices. The power structure was not flattened, it was just disguised as a hip aesthetic. And that aesthetic spread because it was profitable. Real estate costs fell by eliminating walls. Furniture costs fell by standardizing desks. Energy costs fell by lighting one big room instead of many small ones. The metrics that C-suite executives cared about, cost per square foot, headcount density, all improved. The metrics they did not track, cognitive load, recovery time, chronic stress, were the casualties. The system was never broken. It was working exactly as designed. But here is the paradox that no spreadsheet captures. The cost savings from high-density layouts are dwarfed by the productivity losses from distraction. The $2.5 trillion the World Economic Forum projects is not a rounding error. It exceeds the GDP of most countries. The savings at the facility level produce losses at the economy level. The office is a private efficiency that creates public damage. And yet, every morning, 9 million workers sit down at those desks, plug in their laptops, and pretend that the noise is normal. They buy noise-canceling headphones as if the cure for a poorly designed room is an accessory. They schedule focus blocks as if the calendar can protect them from a tap on the shoulder. The burden of the flaw has been shifted from the builder to the occupant. If this hit, comment the moment you realize that the cost was yours to carry, not theirs to fix. That is the step nobody wants to take. The admission that the system will not save you. Because the truth is sharper than any design. The office you work in was never optimized for your best thinking. It was optimized for your predictable presence. The same square footage that collected your rent also collected your focus. The cost was not an accident. It was the price of admission. So the question you take out the door tonight is not about better time management. It is about whether the price you are paying is worth the product you receive. Your attention has already been deducted. You are the only one who gets to decide whether it was a fair trade. The building will not change. The layout will not change. The notifications will not stop. But the boundary is yours to draw. And once you draw it, the tax collector no longer has access to your account. The final sentence is not an invitation. It is a claim. Your attention was never theirs to take. You are the only one who can choose to reclaim it.